I'm Neil Loudon, Group Manager in SES Structures in High Wycombe, England, with particular responsibility for the structures standards as part of the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges. I would like to welcome you to the first of a series of webinars produced by High Wycombe, England's SES Structures Group. They're designed to provide you with information about structure standards which were updated and republished as part of the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges, which we commonly know as the DMRB. The webinars will provide some background information on the standards or a series of linked standards, details of the key standards, key changes from previously published standards, and the benefits and impact of using the new standards. We hope that you will enjoy listening to the presentations and that will provide useful information to support your role within High Wycombe, England, or as part of the supply chain, or for other bridge owners and wider industry. We will welcome feedback on any of the published standards or in response to the webinars. The first webinar today provides information on the background to the DMRB review of structure standards. So I'm going to cover the updating of the DMRB, details of some of the standards that we've changed, implementation of that program, a little bit on what's coming next, and how we're communicating the changes and dealing with frequently asked questions and a little bit more information. So this is a reminder of the challenge that was set for High Wycombe, England in 2015. It was to undertake an initial review of the usability, structure and content of the DMRB by April 2016. And depending on the conclusions of that review and advice from the design panel, develop a work programme to refresh the DMRB during the first roads period up to March 2020, particularly so that it reflected the needs of its users. That review process and consultation highlighted a number of things. There were over 300 documents in total with 15,000 pages of detailed technical text. 50% of those documents were advice, the rest were standards. And in terms of the age, a lot of the standards were becoming aged. The graph on the right shows you that indication. As the number of documents increased, the age of the documents also increased. The actual task to review the DMRB was a top priority between 2017 and 2020 for High Wycombe, England. It was a very short period and a huge task. And for structures, there were over 100 documents involved, which covered the BDs, BAs, older BE documents, and interim advice notes. And one of the overriding aspirations of the new DMRB was to define clear and unambiguous requirements to ensure that all overseeing organisations could discharge their obligations. In order to take on this large task, we set up a team within the Structures group. The team was there to manage the programme and assist document owners and authors. We managed to ensure that documents were resourced either in-house or with consultant support where necessary, and we've managed that process through procurement as well. We had to establish document linkages between a number of the standards, other complexities and linkages, and deal with a whole range of issues associated with the publication process. Part of that was to establish who the document authors were and to provide assistance and advice to them, and to learn the lessons and share advice so that we could improve as we were going on through this process. In terms of the documents themselves, we had a number of options available to us. We could either withdraw a document completely, if it is now superseded. We could refer to industry guidance rather than cover that guidance within a High Wycombe, England document. We could merge documents. That was essentially between standards and advice notes, so there was only one document. All the documents that were updated were to a new format, which I'll cover in a moment. And some of those also were technically updated. All interim advice notes were to be absorbed within the new documents. And as a result of the changes that we were making to the standards, there were a number of associated changes to the specification and notes to guidance, which were also implemented at the same time. In order to reflect the way that the documents are used by not only Highways England, but Transport Scotland, the Welsh Government and the Department for Infrastructure in Northern Ireland, we set up a number of associated annexes to the main documents to cover the particular requirements for each organisation, where there were differences in legislation, process or practice. So one of the important things was to make sure that the documents were published in a very consistent format. So each of the documents that you can see, not just structures ones, will have the same format. That is a series of requirements and associated advice and notes linked to that requirement in a very specific way. So the language that we used for requirements, it's shall and must. For advice and notes, should, may and can be used. So we make sure that those requirements and that associated guidance is very clear. So part of that was to ensure that the language used was not vague and the certain phrasing was not allowed, words reasonable or as practical, for instance, weren't allowed to be used. There were some carefully crafted drafting rules, and we had to follow these in drafting all of the documents. And part of that process is to make sure that they were very clear to use for all users. Overall, as well as the consistent approach to the drafting, we reduced the number of documents down to around 60 from the original nearly 100 structure standards. It reflects good industry practice and encourages innovation, and the documents will ensure that they complied with both EU and UK standards and legislation. And in using suitable IT software, the documents have now been digitised, which should facilitate future updating and management of the standards process. We also use some software to help track and manage the document development programme. Now, one thing people will notice immediately that the familiar numbers that people have used in the past, such as BD2 for technical approval, have now been replaced, and there's a system of numbering for all the documents that's based on the asset type. So across the right at the top of the headings, so structures and bridges are in the C series, and then down the left-hand side is a series of other letters which are associated with the life cycle of the structure. So a structures standard, for instance, in the design series will be prefixed by CD, followed by a number. And I'm sure in time we'll get used to these new numbering. The documents were developed, as I say, authored either in-house or with assistance from consultants. They were peer reviewed through a technical project board, and that technical project board consisted of overseeing organisations, adept, industry specialist groups and staff within Highways England. As I've said, we've used editorial and tracking software, and additionally there was a technical editorial process. So overall there was a lot of input to the draft documents to ensure that they were fit for purpose. Now I'm going to turn briefly to some of the key documents that were involved, just to give some familiarity with the new documents. The further webinars will cover some of these documents in far more detail. One of the key ones I've already alluded to, BD2, covering technical approval, is now CG 300. And we have a number of suites of standards as well. So there's a series of tunnels documents which have been updated, covering both design, maintenance and inspection and records. The further suite of documents, the linked documents on assessments, a whole series of these have now been updated. Some of these did have considerable technical changes, and the webinar on assessment will provide that information for you. Chance was also taken to update some key other documents, such as for inspection, CS450 replacing the BD63, to clarify some of our inspection requirements. On concrete repair, the BA35 is now being replaced by CS462, but associated with that, we took the opportunity to publish the specification for Highway Works' new series of clauses to cover concrete repair. These formerly were dealt with by departures from standards and now have been published in the 5700 series of the specification. Other key documents that we've looked at have been around the reintroduction of the use of concrete impregnation using hydrophobic pore lining impregnants. CD 373 has replaced BD 43, and again associated with that are some new specification clauses involving a new test method, and that's published in the specification of Highway Works clause 1709. In terms of the management of vulnerable structures, a number of structures fit this category: half joints, decks, hinge decks, post tensioning, scour. And we've now updated those standards, and we will be publishing some implementation documents for those standards in due course. One of the key ones that's not yet published is around the management of scour susceptible structures. This is CS 469, replacing BD 97 and an interim advice note 173. We've had to look at this very carefully in association with its implementation, particularly as we've now included reference to the latest research on debris effects in structures over watercourses, and also adding in the management of floodplain structures and also the latest climate change predictions. Again, a further webinar in due course will cover the implementation of this document. Other key documents relate to vehicle restraints. So there's a series of documents here around design, assessment and upgrading. And then lastly, in terms of the key documents, I wanted to just highlight the new document on the appearance of bridges, which replaces BA 41 with a new document CD 351, and embodying the new processes to ensure that our structures newly designed or modified in service have good design principles and present a good appearance for our road users and neighbours. As I said, implementation is something that we're working on currently, and this will be introduced and phased in on new contracts. In some cases where documents are to be used proactively, rather than in the case of most documents which will be just used reactively, we will be having a number of implementation documents. And as I've mentioned, one example is around the management of vulnerable structures. Moving on now to the next steps, having completed the work on the DMRB, we're now being, as part of the RIS2 period, have a requirement upon Highways England to update the specification notes for guidance and other parts of the MCHW. And this needs to reflect good practice. And again, as with the DMRB, will allow the use of digital technologies to help with republishing and updating. Currently, as at July 2020, the draft rules are being developed for the drafting of the documents. The programme is expected to commence in April 2021, with an expected 2-year period for completion. I also wanted to highlight some other new documents which Highways England Structures team are working on currently. And this is really filling in some gaps in our knowledge, and again around critical and vulnerable parts of structures. So a key one is the second one on the list, which is around the management of hidden structural defects and this is based on a Syria publication, Hidden Defects in Bridges C764. And we're going to be looking initially at fatigue-prone steel structures, but we expect to reflect on other types of hidden critical parts of structures in due course. Part of that is a proposals to manage safety critical fixings, and again a document and implementation strategy are currently being developed. And then finally, on the new documents, not to be in the DMRB though, is a document to cover design guidance around the use of temporary bridges in unplanned emergency situations. That's work we've been doing collectively with the Department for Transport, the Bridges Board, and with the temporary bridge suppliers. In due course, we expect there to be guidance available and publicly available for all bridge owners in the UK. So just reflecting on the DMRB programme, overall we expect there to be fewer departures from standards, which I think will benefit all users of the DMRB. Again, from a contract perspective, we expect there to be fewer compensation events, and that will lead to efficiencies and economies. And taken collectively, there will be something in the order of 25 to 50 million pounds of efficiency savings per year. Now that's across all the standards, not just the structures ones. And looking forward, the new digital publishing route will enable us to have improved efficiency and speed of production through any changes that will require in the future that need to support Highways England and other users through the standards. That will allow us to update more frequently and be more responsive to feedback. So part of all of this is to make sure that the DMRB is aligned with our newly published asset management policy and strategy, a transformational journey published by Highways England. The asset management policy and strategy has been published by Highways England, illustrated here. And it's important to reflect the fact that it's a through life approach to asset management. So it's focusing on customer services, linking strategic planning and delivery, ensuring that we have the right intervention at the right time on our structures, and using our asset knowledge to manage and mitigate risks, making better whole life decisions, and empowering and connecting our people. Now, all of those themes are essential to the way we manage structures, and standards and associated advice support that process overall. And so it's right to very much link the DMRB review with this approach that Highways England has adopted. Looking at communication, so we will be publishing bulletins on our innovation hub. In fact, some are there already, the links there, with other information about the DMRB review. We've got this and a series of structures webinars to give information about individual structure standards or linked documents. And we've already provided a number of presentations to external organisations, primarily the Bridges Board and Bridge Owners Forum, and attendance at a few national conferences to provide information on the DMRB review. We're also publishing a number of articles in the technical press as well. So here is a list on the left-hand side of the webinars here that will follow from this overview webinar today, and the articles that we propose to be published in an ICE special edition of the Bridge Engineering Journal with details of a number of the documents. So look out for those. And turning finally to frequently asked questions. So where do I find all the new documents? Well, most of you will be, I'm sure, already aware that all DMRB documents are freely available through the Standards for Highways website, and the updated documents are already there. There will be also access to older documents, understanding that a number of these will be still applicable on contracts. documents dating back to around 2001 are available in the archive section of the Standards for Highways website. Very useful facility. And for any older documents than that, if you email the standards_inquiries website, other documents dating back before 2001 can be made available. So one of the key questions is around the new documents and how they're to be used. Now, this principally applies to Highways England. So the requirements for the implementation of the documents are contained in another standard, GG 101. And the message from this document is that all new documents should be used as soon as they're published. There are some exceptions to this and can be proposed where implementation will result in significant expense or delay to contracts that are already well underway. Most of the structures documents are expected to be implemented when needed and will be triggered by a contract event when a new design is being proposed or maintenance works are being suggested. As I've already indicated, there are a few documents which will be used proactively, such as those relating to risk management of vulnerable structures. And for these documents, it's expected that implementation documents will be published, and indeed a number of these are under preparation at the moment. So lastly, so we would very much welcome feedback on the documents. And again, the standards_inquiries websites from Highways England provides a means for feedback, and those, if there are comments on particular structure standards, those comments will be fed back to the document authors for consideration. We very much welcome that. So that's the end of this particular webinar. Thanks very much for listening. Hope you found it useful. Please make use of all the other webinars which will be available, which provide background to the most used standards and more information on the key technical benefits and impacts of using those standards. Please become familiar with these standards, particularly the new numbering system, and use them so that structures are designed, built and managed to, and really ensuring that they are safe and fit for service. So the team, the HE SES Structures team, are here to help and support you through the use of the standards. Please make use of that feedback if you need to. Thank you for listening today.